This episode is brought to you by Rad Dudes Who Love Nature.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
So, welcome to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. We've got an extra big crew today. You got me, Billy Brown.
We got Tony Crosdale.
Mike McGraw.
Matthew Howey.
All right, so we are going to start with with another comment. What you got there, Tony?
So, we see this email from Vijay Patel from Mumbai, who's really thinks we should do an episode on black kites. So, black kites and black-eared kites, they're in the Milvus genus. They're
How would you pronounce that properly?
Milvus.
Milvus. They are they are hawks, that kind of take the role of like gulls and crows or like black vultures, but in like tropical cities in the old world.
Okay.
So if
They're,
you're in,
they're
They hang
thick,
around in-
thick in Bangalore.
They hang around in parking lots and like go after the
so
trash.
if you're in
and
Hong
stuff?
Kong, there's also yellow-billed kites in East Africa, and so you're just like chilling in these Hong Kong and like flying around. Hong Kong looks like Blade Runner, and there's it's the craziest city I've ever seen. I mean, I've been to like a bunch of countries in Asia, and I think Hong Kong takes the cake, and puts Japan to shame in my opinion. And flying around these skyscrapers is all these black-eared kites, and they're really cool. Once saw them grab out of a shrub a whole nest of some kind of I don't know what kind of species of bird it was, but and then it eats the chicks out of the nest in flight.
Wow.
So
But they mostly
badass.
scavenge.
So when we say that they're an old world analog to black vultures in the neotropics,
Yeah.
in the neotropics, the black vultures also opportunistically eat fruit, and so there's a lot of rotting fruit in the dumps around the city. So black vultures are scavenging, and so
Yeah.
big flocks.
Well, looks like we need to do an episode on black vultures as well.
Yeah, but are these black kites? I remember seeing huge swarms of black kites in Bangalore in southern India, and also in Mysore and some of these other cities. But do you think that they're also omnivorous?
I
or-
don't know. I'll need to look in the literature, but it's quite possible.
Well, I can add to that. Last night I thought you were there to hear it. Katie, my colleague from Penn, she lived in, maybe it was the yellow what kite?
the yellow-billed kite.
Yellow-billed kite.
There's a whole kite complex.
She grew up in Africa, and she said that when she was in school, they'd sit outside eating French fries, and they'd get mobbed by these crazy old aerial displays from kites that would pimp their French fries right out of their hands.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean,
And
like I
that's
said,
what
like
ring-billed gulls. Or wait, which of the gulls will like take your sandwich out of your hand here?
ring-billed or laughing.
And laughing.
Yeah.
Laughing girls will do it.
But yeah, I mean, because you think about gulls as being like ubiquitous, but then you go to like the tropics and there's barely a gull to be found in these coastal areas, and they're not in the cities, scavenging, and there's not crows in a lot of these. Some places there are, there'll be jungle crow, house crows, whatever, but in some cities there's no crows, there's no gulls, and it's just these kites.
Okay. Well, there you go. So we're actually going to talk about rattlesnakes in a second, but I've been sort of fixating. I don't know, fixating. I've been getting more interested in the idea of plants and animals that don't necessarily eat us, so not parasites, but that live in let's say, the habitats we create just as part of how we live. And I was calling them all commensals. I learned that there's a word for this, synanthrope, and I defer to someone who might know how to pronounce it better, but I'm saying that for now. And I'm going to bet the adjective would be synanthropic. Okay, cool. We're all agreeing on this?
Oh, yeah.
Fine, all right.
Indeed.
And so I was first thinking about it in terms of plants that when you look at what we think of as weeds in even the United States that came over from quote-unquote Europe, a lot of those are originally Asian steppe species or Eurasian steppe species that were maybe pre-adapted to sort of rocky, sandy conditions like you'd see in a city. And so they were pre-adapted to come over to even here, to our cities, let's say. I remember seeing lamb's quarters as an example of that. An article for Grid once about rock doves, aka pigeons, that sort of they're so widely distributed by people and live so much in our habitations in our cities that it might be hard to pin down where exactly which rocky cliffs in Europe they're originally from. And so, inspired by my most recent few trips to the Y to go swimming and the locker room, I was bringing up things you think about when you're taking a shower and you're into wildlife, is looking at the wall and looking at that little fly sitting there. And so I was thinking about drain flies.
The one with parallel venation.
I know, we're looking at the Wikipedia page. I read a few other things about them. These are small, fuzzy-looking flies that look like moths. Turns out the fuzz is an adaptation to sort of aquatic, or to being around water, where it helps repel water. So if you ever tried to flush one of these down the drain or like wash down the drain, it doesn't work, apparently. It'll crawl back out and fly away.
And superhero with like shoot flame at them and it just like bows around them and they stand there all boldly.
Now that would be a badass little fly.
Force field shield.
Yeah, totally.
For all we know, they could be evolving that trait right now. If we try to use flamethrowers to eradicate them, we might select for the flame resistant drain flies.
Let's get started. I got a little
I'll bet their little hairs would shrivel up like the hairs on my arm with a cigarette lighter.
Or,
you can do that experiment right now.
Yeah, let's pass on.
And so these are things I've always thought was kind of harmless. I wonder, like, one of my best friends has like this raging an ongoing war against the drain flies of his kitchen.
Are they going psycho to combat the psychotidae in their house?
Their family is a psychotidae. But
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Does synanthrope necessarily mean that there's a commensalist relationship between these two organisms? So does if the relationship is synanthropic, does that organism necessarily have to provide a benefit to humans?
Right.
Or can they just be kind of a nuisance, not really a parasite, just a nuisance?
I think it's the latter. I mean, I think it's that they can just be living around. They live in our places. Is my understanding of it. So we were beginning our discussion of synanthropy, and with the drainfly.
And you want to do a synanthropic animal organism of the episode?
I think I want to do that. Yeah. So like we'll see. Like we do things like pigeons, like squirrels.
This would be a really cool suggestion that our listeners could send us.
So hey, if you've got an interest, it's a perfect point. At urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can send us your suggestion of a synanthrope for us to talk about. I've been particularly fascinated by things that we think of, at least here, as native wildlife that become sort of synanthropic around us. So thinking of like possums and raccoons, or squirrels, like you said. Gray squirrels were here before any humans got here, probably, and yet they have they
proliferate.
They do really well around our cities.
Go ahead. I was going to say a great example of synanthropic organisms in birds are these birds that, like eastern phoebe, chimney swift, birds that utilize man-made structures. Like I don't know when the last time I found an eastern phoebe nest on a natural cliff edge.
Right.
Yeah, they're almost entirely trail. Yeah, they're like trail kiosks and like stone bridges over like creeks and parks.
So I'm glad you brought that up because maybe since this word is so interesting, we should either find out where the definition lies or develop where that may lie. Because think about it, like American woodcock, that species has been around for a very long time, and some argue about what they did when pre-invasive worm species. Sorry.
That was a ringtone, in case you hadn't guessed. Go ahead.
Of what?
Of an endangered coqui frog in southeastern Puerto Rico.
There you
cave
go.
coqui.
That's how we roll.
Oaxaca.
Okay. Go ahead.
I want to go back to drainflies because in my invertebrate zoology class, my professor brought in a mystery animal, and he gave he'd let you remove another one of your lowest quiz grades to identify this mystery animal, and I was the one that got it.
Was it a drainfly?
It was a drainfly.
There you go.
That he got.
Yeah.
It was larvae that he got out of his son's fish tank, like up in the.
You ID'd the larvae?
Yep,
Wow.
like a boss.
Jeez. All right.
Synanthropic boss.
So I'll say,
I missed him. I was like came late.
So hold on. So that is commensal because that larvae actually benefited.
Then
Steve.
you-
did it, or did it because I actually got so enthralled with identifying this that I actually like lost track of time and came in 10 minutes late to a meeting at the water department meeting.
Synanthropic organism.
But let's talk about some rattlesnakes.
let's talk about rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
Rattlesnakes.
So this is sort of like fanboy stuff now for Billy, and for Mike. It turns out that it's a long story how we got in touch with the guy, but there's this book, Landscape with Reptile, which came out a while, like, I don't know, I can look this up, but let's say in the 90s, and it's hard to know how to categorize it. It's a sort of a natural history of rattlesnakes in Massachusetts, and specifically this population that occurs right next to Boston in the Blue Hills. And it's this wonderful book where it looks at sort of, like I'm saying, the natural history of the rattlesnakes, talks about the landscape, the place, and it talks about sort of how humans have lived with and tried to kill rattlesnakes and have successfully killed a lot of them.
The title,
Northern
it's
Tribes.
funny, it's very appropriate for the Urban Wildlife podcast because it's landscape with reptiles, rattlesnakes in an urban world.
There you go. You know, it's the kind of thing when you're a fan of a book, you can't imagine that someone who wrote such a cool book would want to talk to you. But, hey, we tried, and we actually got to talk to Thomas Palmer. And so what we're going to listen to in a second is the interview with Thomas Palmer. Some stuff, we can't talk about everything, or we can't include everything, and we talk for like an hour in the interview. But, he starts off with something real, which sort of, it's really simple, but it kind of blew my mind, which was the point that humans lived in New England, right around when glaciers were there, and as soon as when they were seeded, we assume, right? I'm not assuming. We have evidence of it. And they lived there when New England was probably like tundra, and as the forests grew in, and the rattlesnakes basically would have shown up much later than the humans. So there were millennia of humans, living there as rattlesnakes sort of gradually moved in and lived there, and they only got wiped out, when sort of European culture showed up. It's just sort of pointing out that our relationship with them is definitely sort of a culturally mediated relationship. It isn't necessary that humans can't get along with rattlesnakes. And so that was sort of the part we didn't get to. And now I'm going to switch gears and we'll start listening to Thomas.
How'd you get into writing I'm not even sure how to categorize it, sort of a natural history book about rattlesnakes?
Well, I've always been a herper, somebody who's interested in finding reptiles and amphibians from quite a young age. And I never outgrew it. And as an adult...
Neither have I, which I applaud.
Yeah.
So it's great.
As an adult, I learned that there was a relic population of rattlesnakes outside Boston, and it became a quest of sorts to try to find them. I eventually did, but as I was doing that, I became interested in the area and their background and so forth. And at that time, I was a novel writer, and being a novel writer means you have to stay at home and think up things. And this was refreshing to actually go out looking for facts on the ground. And the book grew out of my quest, I guess. I thought, I need another project. This is actually quite interesting to me, and I can use these animals as a sort of lens to look at what's happened to the landscape over the last 400 or 500 years.
And I've been to Boston. I don't think I've ever stopped or looked closely at the Blue Hills. So for people who aren't familiar, set the scene. What are the Blue Hills and how they relate to the Boston metropolitan area?
Yeah, Boston, like most American cities, has a beltway around it. But in Boston, it's interrupted by the Atlantic Ocean, so it actually forms a sea. And it's open to the east, where the water is. And if you look at it on a map, it's a little bit of a misshapen sea because the bottom arm actually juts out southerly more than you would expect. It kind of is offset a few miles. And the reason for that is it couldn't be a perfect sea because there's this chain of high rocky hills that discourage highway building. And they're about 7 miles long. And at the east end, you can see the water. At the west end is Blue Hill, which was once called Massachusetts. That is the Blue Hills, and were turned into a park in 1896, a regional park, in part because the land was quite cheap. It was high and rocky and hard to develop. And that park became a refuge for these animals. Not deliberately, it just happened that that was their habitat. So that was 7 miles of continuous exposed, cracked rock that they could use for denning. And the presence of that long east-west ridge gave them quite a large refuge at a time when people were killing them wherever they could find them, and that went on a long time. So in general, they were distributed throughout the state in all rocky areas to begin with, but now they have dwindled just to a few areas where the habitat was particularly suitable, and the Blue Hills turned out to be one of the best of those areas. And if you want to find more, you have to travel 100 miles west across the Connecticut River to find them again. So they have been islanders here, isolated for centuries, basically, and beleaguered but persistent. And every generation of humans who has grown up around them has seen them a little differently, depending on the cultural moment. So that became what I thought was an interesting story to tell.
So how long does it take to get there from Boston? 10 miles. Okay.
10 miles from the State House is the Blue Hills.
Neat.
Yeah. Inside.
I wish we had rattlesnakes 10 miles from here.
Yes, I agree. You know, you might have parklands that would furnish their appropriate habitat. As far as their diet, they're not demanding. They can eat any warm-blooded prey of the right size. They eat songbirds. Particularly, they like rodents. Rodents are probably the main diet item, and certainly those are rarely available.
No, we got plenty of mice and chipmunks, so yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so they were not limited by habitat before their troubles started. There was quite a bit of habitat. So many rare species are dependent on rare habitats. These were not. And it may be that they would not be called a rare species, namely timber rattlesnakes, if you were in the heart of the Appalachians, say from Pennsylvania or maybe the Hudson Valley southward. There are still widespread areas where they exist. So it's unlikely they'll be placed on the federal endangered list because you can't really make a strong species distinction between the snakes here and those, say, in Great Smokies. But as far as I know, around the margins of their original range, they have dwindled hugely. In New England, I believe every state, they're on the endangered species list now.
How did that happen?
Well, it was basically people killing snakes, I believe. It was people who felt that there was some kind of advantage to doing that. And who were these people? They were mostly farmers. They were people who occupied the land very closely for generations, beginning with the white settlement of eastern North America and continuing right up until, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 years ago, small farms became economic and the land began to grow up in the woods again. But during that long interval, at least 200 years in most places, everywhere was occupied, and everywhere included people who knew whether or not the rattlesnakes were around and who also knew how to kill them. They're vulnerable because they're tied to their birthplaces, or to their denning sites, I should say. These rocky places where they gather communally to overwinter. And because they do aggregate there, if you go there at the right time when they're vulnerable, you can kill them in numbers. And this species is what ecologists call R-selected, meaning it has fairly long adult life and good adult survivorship, but not a high reproductive potential.
Right.
Yeah,
they're like turtles. Yeah.
That's right. A female timber rattler will probably only give birth 3 or 4 times in her life because she has to take 2 or 3 years in between births to build up her fat reserves so she can become pregnant again. And in those times when she does give birth, the babies are born alive, and there's no more than 12 or 15 at most. It used to be that once a rattlesnake became an adult, it was pretty well equipped to defend itself, and the adults generally made it from year to year. but that's no longer the case. I think nowadays, not because farmers are killing them in the dens, but because they do not move very quickly and they just can't get across a well-traveled road without getting
yeah.
squashed.
No.
Yeah.
When you see them on the road, from Herbert's perspective, they're just they're moving in a straight. They're compared to something like a black racer, which sort of scurries across the road really
That's
fast.
right.
A rattlesnake just is very deliberate, straightforward
takes its time.
motion. Yeah. In your book, you go through sort of in some cases the bounties, but even before the bounties, sort of accounts of people going out and sort of as an event, as a party, or what have you, or just as something that they need to do, is going out and killing the snakes at the den. Why do you think why did they persist in the Blue Hills as opposed to other hills elsewhere in southern England?
Because there were so many dens in the Blue Hills. Because there was so much rock, 7-mile long, south-facing ridge, that the people who went to kill them never found all the dens. That's my speculation. Right. I can't prove that's the case, but I would guess it's so. And as you go west in the state, curiously, there are certain east-west ridges that are now refugia for them, like the Blue Hills, for instance, I believe Mount Holyoke, a few other places. So, I think the effort was pretty constant across the whole state, but the results varied depending on the difficulty of finding all the animals. I think if you have an area with just, say, one isolated mountain, you know where the dens would be on that mountain, most likely, and so you could find them all quite quickly, but it was a little different in the Blue Hills. They were widespread in Massachusetts. They were involved in the founding of Boston because, according to John Winthrop's journal, the colonists abandoned their first settlement in what's now known as Chelsea, one, because there was no good spring for water there, but two, because there were rattlesnakes. At least he said that the place they did settle, namely the Shawanoe Peninsula, the new place they moved, he said that it was free of wolves, mosquitoes, and rattlesnakes.
I can respect the mosquitoes part.
And he carried around an herb that the Indians had told him would be an antidote for a rattler bite.
Well, in the book, you catalog the bites people have gotten in the area from rattlesnakes, and for something that on the individual, an individual rattlesnake is definitely, when anybody getting other ideas, it's definitely a very dangerous animal if you get bitten by it. If you actually, as you did, look out and try to add up, over time, how many people have actually been killed by them. It's horrible when it does happen, but there don't seem to be very many mortalities.
Yeah,
any.
It was surprising to me how hard it was to document any actual instances. I looked very hard, and it was very difficult. I certainly couldn't find any in the last 100 years, even though the Blue Hills Park probably now has 100,000 visitors a year. In fact, I was not able to document a single rattler bite in the history of the park. But as you say, an adult rattler has enough venom to kill 3 adult people. So why is it that people were not dying of rattlesnakes' bites? That was a question I tried to answer. Number one, very few are bitten. Number two, a defensive bite is often what they call a dry bite, meaning no venom is injected. There were readers in other parts of the country who objected to my conclusions because I think in the southeast and maybe Mississippi Valley there are more deaths from timber rattler bites, but most of those, curiously, seem to have been people who have been handling the snakes in church. That's
those are famous incidents, but
that seems to be the major
but this is a species of snake. Sorry, this is a species of snake which people can handle them in church and handle several of them routinely, and still it isn't like everyone who handles them dies.
That's right. It's a rare incident.
Even with them. So so even if you are actively handling them routinely, it is hard to get killed by one.
And occasionally somebody who's keeping a snake will be killed. It's just quite rare. I think something like estimates are all venomous snake bites nationwide, something like 3 deaths a year, maybe maximum. That includes all species. So
Yeah.
it is remarkably difficult to get killed by a deadly snake, apparently.
And it sort of sets up the disproportionate effort that went into wiping them out.
Yeah.
Or that went into trying to kill them.
That's right. It's you get the feeling that there was something beyond simple practicality that
Sure.
went into this, a religious element perhaps, or a sexual element, or something. People got a big kick out of killing them, and they also believed they were doing good in one way or another. You might say, well, if they can kill anyone, anytime, why shouldn't they be removed? And, that's a reasonable question. But the actual risk is very, very small. In the park, why haven't people been bitten? Because the snakes are big enough that if they're lying across a trail, you will see them. And they look scary, so you're not likely to pick them up. And because the snakes do not pursue people or fly through the air, you have to get you have to get quite close to get bitten.
Yeah, and in the United States, I was going to say, generally speaking, just following up on your point about the total numbers of people who die and they get bitten, and that it is people who handle them or who try to kill them who predominantly get bitten. There definitely are some people who accidentally step on a snake, but they're far outnumbered by the people who are trying to do something with the snake.
Yeah. In fact, when I wanted to come up with a scenario of somebody being killed, because I had no actual facts to report, I did arrange for a snake to be stepped on. I think that is the way to get hurt, if blamelessly, so to speak. And how are you going to step on a snake without seeing it? Well, if it's night, or perhaps if you're going through heavy brush, you might do it as well.
I have nearly stepped on rattlesnakes.
Yes.
It's always been going through heavy brush, and in situations where no ordinary hiker would be putting themselves.
Yeah, that is quite an experience. When that happens to me, I feel like it hasn't happened often, but when it does happen, I feel like I've used up my luck. I'm going home.
Just curious about copperheads as well. It's other herpers I've talked to have said that actually they're more scared of stepping on a copperhead because they're even better camouflaged and you don't notice them. And you made the point in the book, no one even knew they were there for a really long time.
Yeah, they were more cryptic for sure. Yeah, I would say they're less poisonous. I mean, that's what most accounts say. But they are harder to see. They are smaller. They probably can't deliver as much venom. Yeah, I have a hard time finding them. I think here in Boston, they are at the northeasternmost point of their North American range, and they're just as scarce as rattlesnakes, but maybe not for the same reason. I'm thinking that they are more intolerant of long winters than rattlers, because their original range was probably 200 miles further south than rattlers. I think there are some in the Connecticut Valley in Massachusetts, but I don't think they get north of, say, Albany in New York. And in Westchester County, they have persisted in more suburban areas than the rattlers have. And so I think they're more equipped to deal with urbanization than the rattlers. They can remain hidden more successfully in smaller areas, but there's something about very long winters, I think, that excludes them. There was one this summer who hung out under a hedge beside a swimming pool in a backyard. Yeah. Yeah, it was a neighborhood snake, and the family had seen it several times, and they had young kids, and so they were naturally concerned. And I went over there once to try to catch it, but it was at the base of a very dense yew hedge, an old hedge that was cut short, but you couldn't see into it from above, and the one grab I made, he ducked away. And what do you know? The homeowner was very resourceful. He went on the internet, he got a grab stick, and he caught it himself with the grab stick.
What did he do with it?
My buddy James went and got it, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, and released it. Yeah, and he also gave them advice about how to landscape their backyard so the snake would not be attracted. For instance, take out that very dense yew hedge. Yeah, and I think they did, but it was remarkable how thoughtful they were about the whole thing. Their idea wasn't to kill the animal, but just to make the yard safe. And I was impressed, because many people even today will say, there's snakes in the Blue Hills, I'm not going there. They have a sort of built-in reaction that prevents them from thinking further about it.
You mentioned a couple incidents, and I think it's illustrative of sort of evolving attitudes toward the snakes, but talk a little bit about the two incidents with police officers and the rattlers in the Blue Hills. Well, this is, and just to set the scene, what had happened is that an officer had been riding his horse in the park and shot a rattlesnake that he found on the trail, right?
Right. The horse named Chico shied away from the snake, and the officer spotted it and pulled out his revolver and shot it to death. You would think that's pretty dangerous in itself in a rocky area to be shooting things. But he was later quoted as saying, well, my horse shied. I could have fallen off and broken my head. He thought he was removing a dangerous and malevolent, life-threatening individual from circulation, which you could say is one thing cops are for. So he was totally nonplussed when he was told that it was a protected endangered species and it was illegal to kill it. And so a debate grew up around that about whether he had been right to do what he did. And I don't think he changed his mind. Certainly, I don't think he was reprimanded or anything. But I think the debate was useful in that it brought out some of these questions. Well, how dangerous are they? And even if they are dangerous, is it better to have them than not to have them? Yeah, it happened again at another spot near the park. And both those incidents were like 25, 30 years ago, and I haven't heard of any since. So it may be that the police are now aware that they're not supposed to be shooting the animals.
What I wanted to just touch on a little bit is you mentioned roads. What are other, maybe things that have emerged since when you wrote the book, but what are other threats to the Blue Hills rattlesnakes?
I would say that is the primary one, getting run over on the roads. And that mostly happens to the males, and it mostly happens around Labor Day, because that's the time of year when the females start to pump out these pheromones or chemical fragrances that are attracted to the males. That's when the breeding occurs late in the summer. And at that time, the males range widely. They crawl all over the place trying to pick up these scent trails of the females. So they crawl across roads quite a bit.
Sure.
And that's when they're... So usually in the Blue Hills, usually about one of them is run over every year. And that may not be enough to be a problem, particularly because they're males. What is the history of the Blue Hills population? I don't know. It's hard to say. They've been known to be there for hundreds of years, but as far as counting, that's quite difficult. I have my own observations starting like in the mid 80s, and since that time, I have seen less of them at the times when you're most likely to see them, namely at emergence when they come out of the dens.
Sure.
In the early years, at some dens, I might see as many as 5 or 6 snakes, and that doesn't happen anymore. I see fewer than that. Yeah, and so I don't know if I'm seeing anything that's real or not. It's my impression, though, that there are fewer. And you have also heard about this fungal disease that killed quite a few starting 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, that is a mysterious thing that caused them to reappear on the ground far later than you would expect to see them, like not just October 15th, but after Thanksgiving or even January. They would come out of the dens on a warm day as if they were trying to heal themselves with warmth because they had terrible problems with shedding, with big lesion, starting at the head usually, but anywhere in the body where a fungus was growing in the skin. And the snakes that came out at that time generally were not seen again in the spring. They when snakes get sick, just for background, that since they can't produce their own heat, they'll bask a lot to try to raise their temperature. So that's what we're referring to. And it's sad. It's something that I know has gotten
more and more attention in Pennsylvania. Just with, I was talking to a researcher recently who I was sort of asking, hey, is this thing really real here? Is it is it something that people are getting all up in arms about because of the amphibian catastrophe with their own fungal problems? And he's like, no. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, we are seeing some really big, high-quality dens where they're seeing what you're describing, where you'll see a lot of sick snakes conspicuously basking, and then you don't see those snakes again. So it seems like they're getting sick and they're dying. So with something that has like you were describing, sort of the very slow reproductive patterns, that's anything that knocks out extra adults is a scary thing.
Yeah, well, many snakes did die out of this local population. On the other hand, not so many sick ones are being seen now. So we wonder, is it true that the more vulnerable ones have been cropped off and the ones that are left are more resistant? That would be I think the way a normal population responds to disease. At any rate, it didn't kill them all, but it brought them closer to the edge because there are fewer of them now. And you always wonder, is there any long-term future for these small, isolated populations?
Right.
Most biologists would say, well, you're just much more susceptible to going below the zero number with any kind of perturbation. And I think that's correct.
It's the old island effect that they can.
Right. So in contrast to so many species that have rebounded as the hunting pressure or other pressures have decreased, deer, turkey, fisher, bear,
squirrels.
So many animals are now more common than they have been for a long time. The snakes are not rebounding, and I think that's a little bit of a mystery why they don't seem able to rebuild their populations where they exist. I don't know of any rattler populations in the Northeast have been increasing anywhere.
Sure.
Yeah, it's so that becomes a kind of management question. We say that the wildlife belongs to the people as a sort of legal definition. We want to preserve the value that every species have. That means we have to keep them from disappearing. How do you do that? How do you change the circumstances so that they can increase? So I don't know. There's a sort of a flavor of melancholy about their story.
Yeah, there certainly is. I'm trying to think of a happy note to end on. I'm not sure I got one.
Well, it is wonderful that so many people make it kind of their business to learn about these animals and see them.
We'll say that,
Yeah. There are quite a few. There is, in around Boston, there's something called the Brotherhood of Snake Watchers. Who are these people? Yeah, it's an informal group, and the only way you can become a member is if a member goes to a snake den and sees you there. That means there's nothing to be hidden from you, that you know where to go and what to look for, so that other person has to be welcome.
That's a very clever intake system. It's something that other people who study other things, or let's say are birders, might not appreciate how secretive and cagey herpers are.
Yeah,
and it's because you worry that somebody's going to clean out the den that you enjoy observing.
Yeah, it could happen with only a few visits. That could be the end. And the people who belong to the Brotherhood communicate and share information. If they see somebody with a pillowcase or a snake hook, immediately that lights up the wires.
But I just wanted I want to wind up and just say thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Yeah.
This has been it was just such a pleasure to be able to talk to you and talk about the book and about the rattlesnakes.
It's Crotalus, not Crotalus.
Yeah, I call it Crotalus.
I've always said Crotalus. I'm sorry, but the knife's right here. I'll be careful.
Crotalus.
All right.
I just had a quick question about population genetics and the spatial ecology of these rattlesnakes. There was a study just recently showing in timber rattlers and also in copperheads that females are able to breed asexually when ecological conditions prevent sexual reproduction. So a female can reproduce sexually when conditions are when they're suitable, And then if there aren't any males around, facultative parthenogenesis is the term, and they can fertilize their own eggs and produce genetic clones of themselves. So this affects the population genetics. And my question is, how does this ability of rattlesnakes to breed asexually, how does that affect the effective population size? So the question is, like, where is that event horizon? Where is that threshold in a population of animals that can reproduce sexually and asexually, beyond which genetic drift and other inbreeding effects cause that population to spiral into oblivion?
Yeah, so if there's a continued simplification of the genes in general that constitute this population, if you add facultative parthenogenesis, are you questioning what does that do?
Another thing.
Does that exacerbate the
It can
genetic
exacerbate
simplification?
Or does it make the population more resilient?
We have a few assumptions here that they're reproducing
Well,
parthenogenically.
one thing we should
it's a
mention-
possibility. But
We
yeah.
have
Well, I'm really
evidence that
curious
it
as
occurs.
to what
Yeah.
environmental stress was your mother under for her to spawn you that way.
Thanks, Tony, for the all right.
So,
Because I'm going to bet that Matt is not a clone of his mother, so probably was not produced
I'm much
by...
hairier.
you've seen the
than
mother's face all right?
It's probably,
Slightly more than half of him is mom, but not all of him.
I'm loving this discussion, but I want to get us back to the overall question of like that we have rattlesnakes or any animal that doesn't actually live in what we think of as an urban place, but is urban in the sense of it being surrounded by suburbs and city, and so is totally cut off from anything else. I mean, I think a lot of our parks, even in Philadelphia or in big cities, where we're really proud of these big urban wild parks, but if they're totally isolated, then you have an island where let's try to think of something else besides a rattlesnake, but some beetle, who knows, or some butterfly that lives in a meadow in the middle of a park.
Much easier for that to happen.
Tiger
Isolation
beetle.
with a butterfly or something. happens.
Yeah, and then the thing can't fly 10 miles to the next meadow, whereas once you get past the suburbs, maybe there's a meadow every 500 yards.
Yeah.
So this is something that's sort of, I think, inherent to urbanization, that you have sort of urban and suburban landscapes chopping up other landscapes.
Right.
And so we've got that here with these rattlesnakes. And on the one hand, it's fabulous that these snakes are right there. On the other hand, it's like them being right there is what makes them vulnerable to my grandkids not being able to see them.
Well, watching the end of anything can be pretty depressing. I honestly, I don't think the genetic isolation is going to be the undoing of these animals. I think it's going to be more direct human influences. You know, I obviously am referencing that I'm speculating that there might have been some isolation prior to a city, suburbs being built around it. But the roads, people collecting, these sorts of things have a great... And then there's other elements that are directly related to the fact that people are living around there that are likely causing second and third degree issues.
And pathogens.
Yeah, you might, but really all you need is the roads, damn it. I mean,
yeah, right.
These things are something we talked about, and Mike was talking about when we were talking about sort of how they move.
Yeah.
They move in a straight line, really slow.
Really slow.
Delivery.
And when they try to start to move in a serpentine fashion, they don't move anywhere. If you ever startle a big, especially a gravid female, if you startle one, even where there's more traction than a road, like on the forest floor, no. But as they try to escape and they start serpentining, they look like the earth is moving underneath them because they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They're not good at moving.
They're not they're not nimble.
Everything about their life
They're not
history
nimble.
is evolved for ambush predation of small mammals.
Yeah.
So that animal is built to chill. It's meant to sit and
Built
chill.
to chill.
Built to chill is my herpetological referencing Built to Swill tribute band. You know what really pisses me off? Have you seen the movie Lone Survivor?
No.
They're like falling. They mention rattlesnakes in it, and they're like falling down a cliff while they're fighting the Taliban. And they're falling down a talus slope while they're fighting the Taliban. And there's a rattlesnake, and it's like, and it makes the rattle that like rattlesnakes don't make. Yeah. They sound like a buzz.
Where it sounds like a maraca or something.
Yeah, it sound like yeah. I'm like, look, America, the Americas, is the only place that you can find
Crotoliths.
rattlesnakes. And why can't we have that? You know,
Yeah.
we're the smaller landmass in the terms of the world, so we have a little bit less diversity. Well, except for birds in South America, where it's the bird capital of the world, and frogs. But I was like,
And salmon.
but yo,
Salmon.
salmon. But like, we don't have tigers, we don't have giraffes, we don't have elephants. But we got rattlesnakes. They're awesome. Why can't they just be ours? Why they got to be putting them in Afghanistan?
I
People,
want my hickory
I don't
trees
know.
and my rattlesnakes.
yeah.
I like hickory
Is that what you're
trees.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a North American pride there.
So we're gonna jump next.
Wait, hold on.
Okay.
I was going to say something. So wait, we talked about roads and how they're devastating and how this is isolated. Why the hell hasn't somebody developed an initiative to create wildlife corridors and prevent this terrestrial snake that doesn't climb well from getting onto the roads?
Maybe it comes down to the difficulty of it's a charismatic species, but it's one that strikes fear into people for reasons that they shouldn't be afraid. But it's a
Nope, I don't buy it, and
It's
here's
not.
why.
It's not a charismatic.
can't
It's
it
not
answer
like an
his
elephant.
Look, man. Yeah, I know. Look, I mean, I radio tracked timber rattlesnakes in the Pine Barrens, where just going to and coming, entering and exiting the site. There's a picture of a little girl and a picture of the meanest looking rattlesnake, and it says that New Jersey wants to protect
This
homes
is
for
related
this,
to
but
it.
not for your daughter.
This is
So,
a battle with developers.
but here's
But
yeah,
is
right.
that an
Exactly. That's a
effective
homeowner
campaign?
association thing. But
Yeah.
Is that an
here's the
effective
thing:
campaign?
you can use that to say, "Hey, we want to make sure people are safe. Let's keep the animals where they belong in their habitat, and let's isolate the built environment from that."
It's
it's
really hard to. It's really hard. You know the answer. It's really hard to do, and people don't care enough about rattlesnakes.
but there are people in the Northeast that care greatly
There
about
are
We
no-
do.
We do, and I have friends that do.
But I'm talking even closer. People in New Hampshire and Massachusetts.
Apparently not critical mass, though. I'm going to bet this is not our last episode about the Blue Hill rattlesnakes, considering how many questions we've
field trip.
generated.
Hell yeah, it's 5 hours away,
We
fellas.
were just talking about this. Yeah, it's 5 hours away.
Let's
We
go
should make
Memorial Day dressed in red, white, and blue with big tires. And
No,
over
what we
50
got to get, because this isn't something I want to reclaim, all of us with Don't Tread on Me apparel.
Oh, I'm down, dude.
Yeah.
Because
America.
we're not exactly Tea Party types here. It's fine if you are. You can still listen to the podcast.
We're liberals that own guns.
But at least some of us. Not me, but Tony is. And
A little bit, Mike.
It's
A little bit, Matt.
Michael, right? But the point is I want rattlesnakes and the "Don't Tread on Me" symbol to be uniformly American, and so that's why I want to reclaim it.
Ann Stengel. I'm a PhD candidate at UMass Amherst in the Organismic and Evolutionary Biology program, and then I'm also the grant coordinator for the snake fungal disease multi-state grant. I'm radio tracking in the Blue Hills right now. Previously, I had radio tracked in a much larger population in Western Mass for several years. So yeah, I mean it's very urban. Interstate 93 is on the edge of their site. So we've certainly had a few roadkills this year, and they do every year. As part of what I'm looking at is movement patterns within this population, so how far do they go, because it is such a restricted area compared to most populations. And then what kind of vegetation are they using, where are they foraging? And one of the key things that I'm doing that I'm excited about is I'm looking at snakes with snake fungal disease and snakes without to see if the disease is altering their behavior patterns or their habitat use or survivorship. So you can track, a little more long term what the disease is actually doing to the snakes.
Is it too early to comment on what you're observing?
With most of the snakes that I've tracked, and this was true when I was in Western Mass as well, the lesions do often seem to get better with each shed. We've had a few that haven't, but yeah, we've had them improve greatly over a year. Sometimes it seems to take a couple of years. I haven't noticed any major behavioral differences yet, but I also haven't analyzed any of the data yet from this year. We're not seeing the massive white-nosed bat wipe out yet.
Right.
Hopefully it stays that way.
I agree. So for those of us who don't know what it's like to radio track rattlesnakes, talk a little bit about
how that works.
Well, snakes, unfortunately, they don't have a neck, and you can't put the little, bird backpack on them. So the radios have to be surgically implanted inside the snake, which means they have to come into the lab, and we have to anesthetize them, and, it's a full surgical procedure. But then we can release them a day or two afterwards when you go out with a receiver and track the signal, but you have to, follow through and bushwhack through the forest to find the snake.
Now where you're looking at them is a park. I mean, it's a place where people go hiking and everything.
Yep.
One of the things I've noticed sometimes when I've found copperheads or rattlesnakes in parks is just I've been amazed at how people don't see what I think is a perfectly obvious snake sitting there.
I know, you'd be surprised. I mean, they blend in. If you don't have the eye for it, you're not looking for them. Most people walk right by them.
What kind of attitudes have you encountered when people find out what you're doing?
Usually pretty positive. When I run into people hiking on trails, they're already outdoorsy nature people. I've had a few that are like, oh, I'm not a huge snake fan, but that's, awesome that you can study them. And, at least out in the field, I don't run into negative comments.
I imagine you spend your winters in the lab, and you're not much use tracking rattlesnakes in December, I guess.
Yeah, the snakes hibernate in the den, and I hibernate in the lab. I think the snakes get the better deal.
All right, thank you very much. I'll be in touch later with when you actually get this stuff posted, okay?
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks. Enjoy the lab. Bye-bye.
You too, bye-bye.
So we just listened to Anne talk about her research. On the one hand, it's heartening to hear that there are that a lot of the snakes, maybe most of the snakes, get better. She mentioned a few of them dying, so maybe I'm trying to reconcile an apparent contradiction here, or sort of one observer seeing a lot of them die, and people we've talked to seeing a lot of them die. Maybe a few of them dying over time for a slow reproducing animal yields the population drop off. But it's a little more hopeful. I mean, it's something that also, that maybe if we see a disease and we're scared about it, then we note the ones that die particularly carefully, and so maybe someone would see 10 of them out in an odd time of year, but you really remember the ones that had the lesions because that's what you're looking for. So this is why you do research, and so it's neat. It's a little hopeful to hear that some of them are getting better.
Unfortunately, on the flip side, she mentioned that she sees multiple roadkills.
Yeah, that's the other part. Yeah,
which is not surprising. Yeah. She's just spending more time out there during the periods of activity.
Yeah. So it's so we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. So here we are at the end. In Philly, certainly we think of timber rattlesnakes as this sort of majestic, or those of us who like them, think of it as these majestic animals of the wilderness,
Pine barrens or the Poconos.
Exactly. They're way out there in wild places. First thing that drew me to this is, what do you mean they're right next to a city? They're 10 miles away?
Well, I think 10 miles away from Boston proper, but if you've ever been in the Boston area, most of Boston isn't Boston. It's all those little towns that link together.
Yeah.
So if you look at this, there's little towns linked together like a wishbone coming from Boston and surrounding both sides of Blue Hills.
So it's just
it's completely cut off.
It's a neatly urban space, or urban surrounded space. I don't know what to call it, but it's
urbanized space.
Yeah.
If this is the West Coast, this would be straight up urban. In the East, we say, "Oh, you have a lawn. You have a tiny lawn. You're suburban." But you got
a 10th acre mowed lawn. You're living large.
You're on the suburbs, or living a good life. But so this is a truly urban phenomenon here. This is really cool.
Yeah, and then is sort of balancing that with the downs. Let's call it the downsides of urban.
Yeah.
So, and something that hasn't been mentioned at all in either Thomas's, and by the way, when we jumped into talking about Thomas's stuff, I didn't even comment just overall what a great interview that was. He's a cool guy, it sounds like, and
Legend.
Yeah,
And we've got a
it's a really engaging. I read that book a decade ago, and I love it. I think it's a great book.
Yeah.
I'm
still kind of tickled I got to talk to him.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. Well,
Isn't this the whole point of us doing a podcast to like have an excuse to talk to like our heroes?
It works.
David Attenborough, expect a call soon.
Nice.
But hey, Mike's go.
I'm interested in how other animals in the trophic web that is the Blue Hills have been affected by people.
Good point.
Has there been, like in the New York Botanical Garden, there's way too many chipmunks. There's
Alvin, Simon,
synanthropy. Is that what we're saying? There's a synanthropic phenomenon occurring with chipmunks, and
baseball caps.
There's so many that the garter. It's hard to find a garter snake that doesn't have a chewed off tail. I saw on 3 different occasions doing a herp survey in the New York Botanical Garden. I found chipmunks running with killed young garter snakes in their mouth. I mean, they're predating on them.
Wow.
So
they need some rattlesnakes to eat the chipmunks.
Yeah, exactly. How many times I thought that? I made corny jokes in my own head about it.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to see what the prey diversity is in the Blue Hills.
It's an interesting question.
They love eating some chipmunks, huh? That's like their main jam, right?
Well, small mammals, yeah. Chipmunks are definitely on the menu for timber rattlesnakes.
Mice, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the Paramuscus genus mice. I'm sure rabbits can be on the menu.
Promiscuous mouse. Is that what you said?
Have you ever met a mouse that wasn't promiscuous?
Sure.
Microtus.
It's the voles that are monogamous, right?
It's those Zappos. It's the ones with the long tails that hold it down.
Yeah.
Matt's about to drive how many hours we talked about?
A lot. 25 or something. 20. Well, there's a ferry ride.
Yeah, Tony's going with them. Yeah.
There's a ferry ride. So I'm going up to Newfoundland to do studies of gray-cheeked thrush, Catharus minimus.
Well, hey, if everybody's plugging travel, can I
go ahead.
plug mine too?
Honestly,
Yeah, so I just took a look at it today. It's 57 hours of actual driving, 3,600 miles. We're going to hit Dolly Sods to look for some endemic salamander species.
Yeah.
On the way to, we're going to drive through Kentucky, maybe stop and do some rad things there, but kind of beeline to southern Illinois.
Snake Road.
Snake hotspot.
Oh.
We're going to hit, it's not the prime time to hit Snake Road, but it's a snaky area. Spend 2 days in that area and then shoot up to southern Wisconsin, meet with some rad legends in ecological restoration.
And eat some curds.
Maybe eat some cheese curds for sure. And then drive directly to the Boundary Waters to do bird research as well.
Oh, yeah.
Community-based bird research in Jack Pine, Black Spruce.
Jack and Pine.
Yes, indeed.
If we're promoting travel on Sunday, I'm going to ride my bike to South Philly.
Yeah.
Look for some rat snakes.
You're going to keep it real urban wildlife. Not us for real.
Oh, well, speaking of urban, on that theme, we're stopping in Springfield, Illinois to look for lion snakes and Kirtland snakes in urban lots.
Kirtland
Say
snakes?
what's up to Cheap Trick?
Kirtlands, yeah.
You're talking my language.
Wait,
All right.
And I got backups for Kirtlands
Springfield,
on the way back because we're doing
Bulldog.
Marshbird surveys in Green Bay, and then we're going to go Kankakee Sands and Indianapolis to chill with family.
Oh,
Kirtland
good.
snakes in Indianapolis.
Next episode is going to be about cat tracking and urban coyotes in a city I used to live in, Atlanta, Georgia.
Eat cats every day.
Maybe they're saying that these pheromones are being put out and stuff. That's what Dude said, and he's absolutely right, and I'm not contradicting that. But I'm questioning. I'm not informing. It makes me wonder if the females.
Are you herp-splaining?
I guess so.